The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. The sun may be setting on a Vancouver Island icon. If you've so much as driven through Duncan in the last 30 years, chances are you've seen the world's largest hockey stick. Now, its future is in doubt with its wooden structure rotting. Built for Expo 86 in Vancouver, it made its way to the island a few years later and currently sits above the CHLY Community Centre. With an estimated cost of at least $1.5 million to restore or replace the stick, the Cowichan Corps Recreation Commission has directed staff to move ahead with decommissioning the world's largest hockey stick in 2024. Its exact fate remains up in the air. To find out more, I got in touch with Cowichan Corps Recreation Commission member and Duncan City Councillor Tom Duncan. What has put the future of the world's largest hockey stick in doubt?
Well, it seems a little bit funny and ironic, but it literally was a woodpecker attack that, forced us to take a very close look at the hockey stick. We do inspect it regularly, and since the early 2000s, it has required quite a bit of maintenance, repainting. We actually had lights installed. We see some signs of rot starting to show up. So we took a look at it. But the woodpecker issue basically required us to take a really close look. And we could see several areas where there was definite rot visible. So if we can see it, it's the type of wood, Douglas fir, that isn't really rot resistant. So, just like a lot of trees, if you can see a little bit of rot on the outside, there's probably going to be a fairly substantial problem on the inside. So that's what sort of brought it to our attention. Like I say, the community has come forward a couple of times and done painting, repainted it, installed lighting at no charge, so because there has been a lot of community support for it over the years. That being said, once we took a look at it, staff realized that this was a significant problem, the rot issue. And that's when we sort of started the process. Well, what do we do from here? There was some talk about a repair and a cost, and some cost estimates were obtained. Quite significant costs, anywhere from $1.5 to $2 million in repair, or there was discussion, should we just replace it? The hockey stick, we've been challenged in the past by some, I can't remember the name of the city, but I think it was in Minnesota. They said they had a bigger stick than we did, and they went to Guinness, and Guinness came over and, measured up the stick and declared that we were still the world's largest hockey stick. Some history on it. I used to live in the Lower Mainland. In 1986, I attended Expo many times. And the hockey stick was there. Jimmy Pattison was quite involved with the Expo 86 process, and also quite involved with, I believe, getting the hockey stick over to the Cowichan Valley here. And, I believe there was a bidding process of some sort. Several towns, cities applied to get the hockey stick, but ultimately we were the successful applicant, you could say. It was transported over here by barge, and then 3 flat deck trucks. It's 205 feet long. So, you really had to make arrangements to have the roads clear, and then installed on the metal structures that we had, engineered to support it on the east side of the hockey arena in Duncan. So when I moved to town in 1989, and the stick was already here, but that's some history on how it got here. Then we proceeded to, with staff, work on a public engagement process, reviewed some questions that we would ask. One of the first questions was, is it important to you as a resident of the Valley to maintain our status as the world's largest hockey stick. Is it important or not important? Then on from there, do you feel that we should save the stick, replace it, repair it? What sort of costs? So it was about, depending on what your answers were. If you answered no, I don't think it's important for it to keep it here. After about 3 questions, that was that you ended the survey. If you had some other, it went into about five or 7 questions altogether. So we did send out that survey in early June. I believe that might have been like June 6th. And we got quite a bit of initial response quite fast. We actually had some discussion about it at our next commission meeting because, again, we were going through that restructuring. It was still the old commission at that stage. We decided that we would extend the public input period till the end of September. From what I heard from staff is that this was one of the most responded to calls for public input that we've had recently in our valley. I know that when we've done some calls out from the city of Duncan, even though we're just a small city, we don't get a lot of responses. Like most places, you don't hear, if things are going relatively well, you don't hear anything. So almost 3,300 people took the time to get back and give us their opinions on it. And of the 3,300, there was 70% were not in favor of keeping the stick, didn't feel that it was a high priority. But of course, there was other people that some even had sentimental attachments. Perhaps their family members had done some design work or help with construction of the materials to get it hung. So there still was 30% that were interested in keeping it. But, one of the things I considered there is in the past, we had the Kinsel Trestle, part of our walking trails. It required significant work, about $2.5 million worth of work. And when we went out to fundraise for that was another CBRD project. We only were able to raise about $250,000. So that still left a big bill for the taxpayers. Right now, there's a lot of issues in all the communities across Canada with such things as homelessness and not good access to mental health services or rehabilitation services. So you have to start looking at, is this really the best way to spend a significant chunk of money? So we discussed it quite a bit at the meeting and then took a vote, and the vote was to decommission the stick. Even the decommissioning process is not a cheap exercise. That's going to probably run to the neighborhood of about $150,000 to get cranes in, close off facilities so that there's no safety issues, and then actually physically get it down. And I don't even think that includes disposing of it. So we're hoping that someone wants to take it for a good home. Maybe the gnome wants to have a stick to go with his title as the biggest gnome on the island. I don't know, but
yeah. Can you tell me about what happens next with the stick? You mentioned you're looking for someone to take it off your hands, basically. Do you have any idea what that process is going to look like?
It's going to be a public process. We're inviting people to submit ideas and proposals, but that's something that we won't be doing anything about it until the 2024 budget kicks into effect. So it really is. It's dependent on what sort of responses we get. I don't know. Jimmy Passon was really involved with Expo and Expo 86. Maybe Jimmy wants to buy it and take it somewhere. I don't know. He's got plenty of stores around that he could put it on top of, I guess, or something. But we haven't. No one has come forward at this stage, other than I did see the one of the interviews on TV was. They had the gnome in the background, and that guy said, it's an icon for the island. And we, I don't know who actually purchased the gnome and moved it around, but perhaps they want to use it as part of a double whammy attraction, biggest gnome with the biggest stick. But it's really going to be dependent on what sort of input we get from the public. It is a significant amount of money, even just to move it around. And I don't know if we're going to get anyone to buy it or whether we're going to have to. We already have budgeted for getting it down from its current location and seeing what we do from there.
And you mentioned off the top that the wood is rotting, and that's the big reason. Does that go beyond just cosmetic issues into becoming a safety hazard?
It is becoming a safety hazard because if you look, a lot of the rot is at where the structure is mounted, where the stick is actually mounted onto the steel structure, and around the bolts. You can see flaking, and if you can see that flaking on the outside, there's more than likely going to be issues on the inside. I know from some of the work that we've had done in the city around trees, and when an arborist comes in, typically if they could see something on the outside, there's usually worse problem on the inside. So there's actually at one point you can see a bit of a curve in the stick is actually because it weighs a lot. It weighs like 61,000 pounds. And it's being supported by 4 structures. So you can definitely see around the bolts flaking of the wood, and that's a little bit scary. We don't want it to fall on anyone. So again, that's where we'll have significant costs. We'll have to close down a couple of facilities there, I'm sure, and hire cranes in to get it down.
You're listening to Midcoast Morning. We'll be right back to our interview with Tom Duncan about the world's largest hockey stick in a couple moments.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Support Midcoast Morning and CHLY's nonprofit newsroom today by becoming a sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. Local news can't survive without your support. Another way to help us out is to share this show with your friends and tell them why they should support us. Finally, if you're listening to the podcast edition of Midcoast Morning, go and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast feed you use. It helps people find us.
Today on Midcoast Morning, we're talking about a Vancouver Island landmark, the world's largest hockey stick in Duncan. After a woodpecker made some dents, it came to the community's attention that the structure is nearing the end of its natural life. The cost of repairing or replacing it was pegged at between $1.5 and $3 million. Public engagement last year found that 70% of the over 3,000 respondents were not in favor of maintaining the stick given the cost. Now, the community is looking at next steps, including seeing if anyone is interested in taking the world's largest hockey stick off their hands. Right now, you're hearing a conversation I had with Duncan City Councillor Tom Duncan. It's my understanding that a part of the public consultation process involved the fact that there's a U.S. city that's planning on building a longer hockey stick, what would become the world's largest hockey stick, with an arena, and part of the consultation was asking people, does that bother you? Is that something that you would want us to take into consideration and maybe extend this stick if we were to restore it? Is that accurate?
I think that's fairly accurate. My understanding is Lockport, Illinois is the city. They've already basically stated, we're going to build ours bigger than yours. I think that ties into one of the first questions on the survey, which talked about if you really felt that it was important to maintain that I guess you would call it the Guinness record. So I think that the first question when you ask people is, how important is it to you to maintain that? I think that ties into, are we prepared to move down that road and spend significant funds? It's hard to say exactly what the other city had in mind, but from the information I've got, they're definitely going to outdo us. So, are we prepared to put a ton of money in to just hold that, hold the record, hold on to the record? I think the public input is saying to us no, but you have to remember too, we have held the record for close to 4 decades, and as records go, that's pretty good. A lot of times people a first in something only holds for a couple of seasons, but in this case, we've had the icon on the island for 36 plus years. So, I think that's and it has brought some tourism into the area. You can definitely see it from the highway, right?
And you mentioned off the top when you were talking a bit about the history of this stick that it was competitive. It wasn't necessarily the case that this was going to come to the Cowichan Valley. There were other cities that wanted the stick. And you also talked about another time when there was contention. Maybe a place in Minnesota had a bigger stick. And it almost sounded like there was some pride in that Guinness came here and said, no, it's still in Duncan. I'm just wondering maybe what's changed between those times and now.
I think that one of the things that we're seeing with the change in the funding formula for the Cowichan Recreation Center and the Core Recreation Commission now, that has resulted in some additional costs for taxpayers. And over the last couple of years, yourself, a lot of properties have appreciated a lot. And with higher values, that has affected some people adversely with higher taxation. So, and I think that there is, more public concern for our actual living conditions in cities these days for the people that are unhoused, and it's like people want something done, and I don't see that they feel that the hockey stick replacement or repair is a high priority when we see people living on our streets. In basically as we move into one of our worst seasons, wet for months here, I think that is more of an issue for communities now.
Is the $1.5 million that could have hypothetically, gone to restore the stick, is that going to be invested in things that would help some of those things you just mentioned?
Well, we did at the same meeting where we had the vote on what to do with the stick. We were also going through our initial budget. We didn't budget to spend that money, but we did have some things in our budget that money could definitely be spent on. So, we didn't, because the way the system works is you do an assessment each year, a requisition from the public for the amount of taxes we need for that year. So we never said, okay, well, we're only going to put $150, $150,000 in the bank, and then we'll spend the other 1.3 million. No, because we're not going to actually ask the public to give us that 1.3 million. But within our budget, there was some things that we could shuffle. There's an HVAC system that has to be replaced. We've actually just had to do the roof on the community center. And that was a huge project. Dollar-wise, it was probably double what we would have to put into the stick money-wise. So again, that ate into some of the reserves that we had established over the years for that building, because it's 40 years old. So there's definitely work that we could do to our facilities right there that it would be money better spent. But we haven't asked the public to give us that extra money this year because it's not in the budget, so we're not going to ask for it. We have recently redid our theater. It is one of the largest theaters on the island. It is the largest theater on the island, with the second largest stage in British Columbia. Queen Elizabeth Theater's got us beat a little bit there. But we just redid lighting, sound systems, seats. So we've always been on a try and maintain things budget, and we did do a lot of maintenance to the stick over the years, but now it's at the point that it's just too much money, I think, to ask the public to, dig into their pockets for it.
The same principles of priorities and, you could spend this money on so many other things would still apply. But I'm just curious about $1.5 million to a community like Duncan is a whole lot of money compared to, say, the provincial government or the federal government, just based on the scale or the size. I don't know. Was there ever a situation where there was some kind of mechanism for money from other levels of government to be considered in saving the stick?
Well, there always is grant money available. Sometimes it's for projects like this. Sometimes it's for new projects. But one of the things you have to understand, excuse me, is that in the area where we are here, the Cowichan Valley, Duncan is actually the smallest city in Canada. We're only 1 square mile. So we're basically in the middle with about 5,000 people. Around us is North Cowichan with around 35 to 40,000 people. And then the region, this Cowichan Valley Regional District, that goes basically from Ladysmith down to the top of the Malahat, that's around 85,000 people. So the funding formula is, Duncan pays some, North Cowichan pays some more, and then the rest is the costs are spread out over several regional director areas within the Cowichan Valley Regional District. So they're always a little, we pay something. North Cowichan, usually because their population, pays significantly more than Duncan. And then each area director has some money that they have to spend too. So it is a case of the money would have to come from a large area. For example, there are other projects that you can apply for grants right now. We have a project that we were lucky enough to receive some grant money for downtown Duncan to redo a park area that we have in the core, right? So the grant process, you never know what can come up. Here we are, like COP 28 is going on, and sometimes the government comes back from that and puts out some funding. So grants come and go, and I don't know that a lot of the times a grant is typically not for operating funds. It's typically for some sort of new project rather than a refurbishing of an existing project. So,
is there anything else you think it's important to bring to the conversation about the stick or the situation surrounding it?
Just that, it's an emotional issue for some people. It's sad to see something that's been in the valley for all that time move on or disappear. And that we are, I think, doing what's prudent for the taxpayers of the area by listening to them and going ahead with what they've asked us to do.
Well, Tom Duncan, thank you very much for taking some time to chat about it with me.
You're welcome. Thanks for getting hold of me.
Tom Duncan is a city councillor for the city of Duncan. We were discussing the situation with the world's largest hockey stick, which faces an uncertain future. The stick started out life as part of Vancouver's Expo 86. Civic historian John Atkin thinks that those who experienced the event might feel a stronger connection to it.
The hockey stick, for a certain generation, is kind of that memento of that quite momentous occasion, which was the World's Fair. But now and I have to correct myself when I do walks with school kids, because, I talk about Expo 86 and then they go, hand goes up and I go, yeah. And they go, what's an expo? And you have to go, oh, right, of course, you guys have no clue about this. So then you have to back it up and talk about a World's Fair. What's a World's Fair? Why a World's Fair? All that context. And I think if you think of it in that sense, there's a whole group of folks that go, what's with the hockey stick? And it's been there, but it's like, why is the hockey stick? And what do you mean? It's falling apart? Oh, okay. But there isn't that same immediate connection to it that I think the folks that when they said, oh, the hockey stick, we could get that. I don't think there's that same resonance of its importance or connection to anything of any event of significance, I think.
Maybe what's the legacy of the expo on the non-Vancouver parts of the province?
Well, there's two, I guess. There's the physical remnants that are scattered all about. I'm always surprised when you're off somewhere in the interior and off in the distance, you go, oh, that's an expo pavilion. And it's being used at a sawmill, for instance, as a shed for something. And there's a couple of them out in the Kootenays, I think it was, and there was a couple of expo pavilions at some industrial place. I think the other legacy, though, really is the intangible one, which is that awareness of place. And certainly for Vancouver and the Lower Mainland, there was a real sort of shift in attitude to this place, because prior to the fair, people knew Vancouver, but if you traveled, and if I remember years ago, but pre-fair, I was in London, I was in a pub and just having a beer, and then when I ordered the next one, somebody said, oh, where are you from? And I said, oh, Vancouver. He says, oh, I've got friends in Toronto. And it's like, there was no conception of Vancouver's space or place. And there was the sports commentator, the late, great Howard Cosell, and he was talking about some sports competition skiing competition up at Whistler, and he said, "And we're here from the village of Vancouver." So there wasn't a great awareness of the city in that way. After the World's Fair, it really put us on the map, but I think it really put British Columbia on the map as well. And so from that tourism perspective, and you look at the popularity of the cruise ships, the destinations of various things through the province, I think the fair really did help put British Columbia on the map.
John Atkin is a civic historian in Vancouver. You can stay tuned to the Cowichan Valley Regional District's website, cvrd.ca, for more information about when you might be able to put in a proposal to try and get your hands on the world's largest hockey stick. That's our story for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom and more. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you would like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. If you're already a supporter, record a voice memo telling others where you're listening from and why they too should support our work. After you're done, you can email it to us. Also, share the podcast with your friends. While Meta is blocking Canadian users from sharing news content on their Facebook feeds, you can still share our podcast directly with your friends via Facebook or Instagram Messenger. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Snuneymuxw First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.